Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another webinar today. I think we have really interesting topics today. As you can see, we're going to talk about CPT codes, insurances, prognosis, and I know that's all of this can be a little too much when you start to think about how to navigate through this and what is a CPT code, how do you deal with insurances, how many insurances are there, prognosis, and all of that. So let's get right into it. Make some introductions again. If you are new here and you weren't there in our last webinars, and this is a little bit of introduction. We have Dr. Singh here again. Thank you so much, Dr. Singh, for being here and supporting us again.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you. We have a great panel that's going to speak to you today. We have myself, Amanda, Katie, and Christina. They all are specialists in different facilities. They've worked in different specialties. They know different things, and we've all come together to share our knowledge regarding what we think is basic, right? We won't be able to give you a full idea, but after this webinar, we're hoping you will have a good understanding of what these things are and how you can start to navigate through it. So what are we going to do today? What are our objectives looking like today, right? We're going to learn about what the CPT codes are. We will understand how to utilize them and where can you find these CPT codes from? Do you have to remember them by heart, or is there a place where you can find them? You could describe what the insurances are, what are the types of insurances, what is federal versus commercial, all of those kinds of things, right? And how to categorize a patient's prognosis. What is prognosis? And how can you effectively deal with these words and these definitions with respect to all of these three things, okay? Now, before we get started, same question again. If you were here in the webinar on Monday, we'd like to know what the audience is, what you're interested in. Are you already working? Are you looking forward to working in a particular field? Just drop your answers in the chat. There is no right answer to anything, right? I'm going to drop my answer too. So here, let's go. Give us some answers so we know who we are talking to. That's good. I'm going to attach one more question to this. Now, knowing what we're going to look forward to today, what do you think? How, out of 100%, how much would you say do you understand all these three topics of CPT codes, insurances, and prognosis? What is your percentage? Say 50%, 80%, 100%. What is your understanding of all these topics? How much do you know? Let's say maybe I understand, I'm going to say 80%. What is your percentage? That's good. That's not bad. And we're hoping that you will learn more. So I think I took over from what Amanda was going to ask you next. That, okay, what is your confidence like, right? Are you very confident in these situations? I just wanted a percentage. It just, I felt like I want to know how much you know, and maybe we'll try to get it a little more than 70% today to at least have a basic general idea. I don't think that we're involved in self-billing or self-doing all of these things, but it's nice to know about these things. That way you know how to navigate through these things. Okay. Moving forward.
Sorry, Amanda, did you want to add anything to that? I moved ahead too fast.
Okay. No, we're all good.
Okay. You guys are just that on the same wavelength. My hand showed up. I can't help it. Okay. Okay, so what are CPT codes? What are these infamous things that we keep talking about that basically determines everything from, right? Like what you're doing with the patients to how we get paid. So this is the technical term, or the definition of CPT code is current procedural terminology. So there are 5 different codes that identify different medical procedures or services that we do. Everyone in the medical field has this. This is how things are billed. But these that are listed here are specifically the ones that we as PTs use depending on the interventions or the type of appointment that we have. Okay. You're going to get copies of all this, so I'm not going to read through every single thing, but on this first page is mostly all the treatment codes, right? So the main ones that we treat, a lot of these should seem familiar to you, are, therapeutic exercise, neuromuscular re-ed, gait training, manual therapy, and therapeutic activity. And then there's some descriptions here about what the differences are between each of those. Okay, so just quick example, therapeutic exercises, usually what falls under there is just anything that's straight strength, straight range of motion, flexibility. If you're getting into more functional activities, even if it's, like sit to stands, for example, sure, that's strengthening, but really that's a therapeutic activity because you're working on something functional. Gait training is different than therapeutic activity in that you're really focusing on gait specific tactics. So how are they climbing the stairs? Are they doing reciprocal? Are they doing step 2? And really just look at the biomechanics of gait to differentiate that between what you might be doing to help enhance gait with therapeutic activity than just their gait in general, if that makes sense. So then the next one, these are the eval codes, okay? So any evaluation. All eval codes are untimed, where everything treatment-wise is timed, meaning, and I know it's going to come up later, but that's when you're basically counting how many minutes you're doing of each activity. So treatments, these are timed. Eval is untimed, meaning you get a base number of units just for completing it. Now, I treat mostly in ortho, outpatient ortho. So most of my evals are low complexity, right? Patients are coming in, they're very stable. We're just working on one thing. So I'm always billing my evals at low complexity. Now, somebody like Christina who works in acute care might see a lot more of moderate or high complexity because they're in the hospital. They're coming in with a lot of comorbidities, a lot of things that you're treating and working on. Okay. So take a look at that and really think about the different categories and levels that have to happen, depending on where you're going to code for the eval versus treatment. Usually when you're doing an evaluation, and this really kind of depends on different places and where your setting is, but at my place where I work, we can code for the eval, and then the expectation is that you still do treatment on top of it, right? So we're coding for the evaluation time, and then whatever time's left over that we've done the treatment for, we also code and bill for that too. But that's really department, place and setting dependent. Now for ICD-10 diagnosis codes, these are all going to be specifically for HIPAA and covered entities, okay? So this is just the standards for the International Classification of Diseases. So for us, for PT, we pretty much just live under the clinical modification codes and the procedural coding, okay? Think about whenever you're working in a place where you're taking Medicare, Medicaid, any private insurance companies, a lot of these diagnosis codes are being used, okay? If you're doing a cash-based service, you're just going to provide your patients what they need to submit to their payers. But it's most likely you're not going to need to use these particular ICD-10 codes for that. Okay, so let's practice, because some of the hardest things when you're starting out especially is like, where do I put what do I do? Okay. And even I made a terrible mistake in the beginning where I just threw everything under therapeutic exercise because whatever is all exercise. So I thought it would be really helpful if we just take time to go through and do these 4 main ones. So the majority of your treatments are going to be one of these buckets probably. So I'm just going to type in the boxes so that it's on the recording. So when you get it, you can see it. But also I want to hear from you guys. So let me get my text box. Let's do one at a time. So let's all do therapeutic exercise. Can anybody think of actual exercises that would fall under therapeutic exercise? You can write in the chat. You can even call it out if you want, if you're brave enough to talk. Shoulder press, great. Bicep curls. Heel slides. Hamstring stretch. Long arc quads, short arc quads. Just throw straight leg raise because that's all in the same mix. Yeah, pretty much anything that has to do with just you are building muscle, you are lengthening that muscle, okay? What would be then different about therapeutic activities? What would fall under here? Sit to stands. Yeah, transfers. Yep, that's functional. What's TS? Reaching. Yeah, so if you're doing like any sort of reaching to top shelf or lifting, I'm gonna combine these. That's functional, right? Because you're like, think about like putting a bag of flour on a top shelf in your kitchen. That's lifting, so technically it's strength, but it's therapeutic activity actually, so you'd want to put it under there. Yeah, any bed mobility, really anything job related. Their negotiation, toileting. Yes, think very functional. Thanks for that from our acute care person. Okay, let's do the neuromuscular reeducation. What would fall under this? What's different about neuromuscular reed versus therapeutic activity though? ENF, syntax, anything posture corrected relation? Yep. Balance, anything balance. That's always what I think. Biomechanics. I like biometrics too here. Yes, proprioception. Yeah, really anything with you're typing out an activity and coordinated with is part of that explanation is neuromuscular reed, right? So in pelvic floor therapy, I put, diaphragmatic breathing or pelvic floor contractions coordinated with diaphragmatic breathing so that we get the full length of the muscle. That is neuromuscular reed. You think I'm just strengthening because we're doing Kegels, but no, we're actually coordinating with our breath to get the full length of the muscle. That's the difference between therapeutic exercise to neuromuscular reed. Okay. So now gait training, what specifically would be here then that wouldn't be in therapeutic activity or even neuromuscular reed, right? Because sometimes gait training could be single leg stance where that's technically neuromuscular reed or therapeutic activity, but what would be different here? We got step overs. Yeah, any pre-gait activities, what would that be? Let's break it out. Weight shifting, that would be one. Sidestepping. Could like assisted device training count under this? Yep. Yep, DME, great. Backwards walking, great. Okay. I think that's a great, any gait patterns, yeah. Perfect. Ran out of space, so I'm just gonna stop there, but you guys got the drift. I really loved the interaction here. Screenshot this, save it so that you are billing appropriately because part of that is getting paid appropriately then, okay? Not all of these are created equal in terms of how we bill. And when you're doing more higher level skill, you need to put that in so that your value is documented. That's my soapbox.
So before we change the slide, just to give you a little more. So like Katie said, right, some of these are reimbursed a little more higher than the others. And that is why justification to why you're using what you're using. Can a therapeutic exercise once be a therapeutic activity? Yes. Does it turn into a therapeutic exercise later on? Yes. Does a neuro re-education exercise become a therapeutic activity at some point? Yes. Does it start with the neuro re-education? Yes. Now, to give you a simple, very simple example of thinking about how to go about these codes, right? Exactly, intention is important. And how do you think about this? When you first teach an injured or a non-working or a re-educating muscle how to move, how to not move into different compensatory postures, how to lengthen, all of those where you need more assistance, more skill, that is going to be a more skilled code. So that is going to be maybe neuro re-education. When gait training, when any of this becomes you training them for actual function that they need to do outside of your office, outside of your clinic, outside of acute care, outside of the hospital, negotiate stairs to get onto the first floor because their bedroom's on the first floor. So when you're stair negotiating, teaching how to negotiate stairs in that scenario, that becomes therapeutic activity. But now after 2 or 3 sessions, they're able to easily go up and down, and you see that. But you still want to keep continuing to build the strength, to build maybe a higher width of stair. That then becomes therapeutic exercise because it does not require as much skill, but you're still continuing to do that so that you can make their function easier and better. So one exercise can actually roll over into different meaning and different intentions, thinking about it how you want to use it. And sometimes it becomes really necessary for you to explain, most of the times, but sometimes more than the others, and we'll let you know why, to explain why you're using what you're using, right? So I think I love the discussion that went on, but this was a little piece on the side to just help you learn better that, okay, this is not sideline to if you can only use a certain exercise in a particular block. You can actually roll around all these 4 blocks, but with the right intention, and that matters.
Okay, so we're going to talk about effective communication. So I found a really good definition online that I wanted to share with you. And it says effective communication is the process of exchanging ideas, thoughts, opinions, knowledge, and data so that the message is received and understood with clarity and purpose. So when you're trying to come up with how you're going to communicate with someone, you can remember the 5 C's, which is be clear, concise and to the point, correct in what you're saying, complete, and compassionate about the message that you're trying to convey. In order to maximize your effectiveness, make sure that you consider the audience that you're communicating with, practice active listening, and use the appropriate delivery medium for your message. A lot of people think communication is just telling or educating in one direction, but communication is a 2-way street. So you also have to practice good listening, asking inquisitive questions, and being able to paraphrase what you heard to make sure that you're gaining understanding while also seeking to be understood.
Okay, now let's go to what is insurance and how do we deal with it and what does it mean? So first things first, insurances, they have difference in different settings. Which insurance to use in which setting, how many are there, how do you navigate through there? They're all different. They're different was state-wise as well, right? Example, in terms of insurances, some insurances and some settings need a more detailed documentation versus others. There is documentation that you collaborate with other providers also. Say you're in an acute care setting or you're in a skilled nursing facility, your assessment or your documentation about a patient should ideally be matching or should ideally have a collaborative say documentation with a speech therapist or an occupational therapist that just came before you and evaluated the same patient, right? That means that you're are collaborating care in a skilled nursing facility. However, an outpatient, you're the only one trying to do your assessment and put your documentation. There is, of course, the insurance company viewing it, but no other collaborative provider is. Have to include the purpose and cause of your skilled PT. And this is all across the board, any setting, you are very much required to suggest the cause of continuing skilled PT or why skilled physical therapy is important for this particular patient and how it will help. Insurances have their own guidelines for compensability. Some insurances give you a little more before they need you to do your reevaluation and show them, okay, this continued care will still continue to help this patient. Some insurances have 4 visits sometimes, and then they want to see progress. And if they do see progress, they will give you more visits to treat that particular patient. So it varies from insurance to insurance. It varies from state to state. There are state insurances versus federal and commercial insurances. State insurances are usually for people that have low socioeconomic status, that people have make below a certain cap of income, that they can also afford insurances and they can avail the services. Where, for example, in Massachusetts, it's called Mass Health. Different insurances are national versus state. Most of the national insurances, I think, are Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna are all national insurances. State insurances are usually cheaper because, like I said, they're availed to to a population which can also afford services. So they are way cheaper, but they also have guidelines that, okay, you only have so many visits that you can use for this particular patient for physical therapy services. So there are limitations to that, but they're still available.
Alrighty, so now we're going to get into two big kind of insurances. We're going to start with Medicare and then we're going to move to Medicaid. So those two are kind of like the big umbrella terms for a lot of the insurances that you'll see. Vidi did a great job on, describing the overall like 101, kind of the breakdown. And now we're going to get in a little bit more of the nitty gritty, but not too much into the nitty gritty. So starting off with Medicare. So what Medicare is a federal health insurance program that covers a wide variety of a range of services to keep adults healthy as they age. So mostly individuals you'll see are elderly with this one typically, and you'll tend to see that especially like an outpatient setting, that would be under, we'll get into the types of Medicare, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but like outpatient, for example, you'll tend to see that those are elderly patients, which is like the setting that I work in. Sometimes it can be for younger individuals with disabilities, but again, it just kind of depends. So then under Medicare, there's 4 different parts. So we've got type A, which is the hospital-based insurance. We've got part B, which is the outpatient-based insurance. You've got part C, which is the voluntary private insurance, and then part D, which is a private prescription drug coverage. Nothing we have to know, but just to at least throw them all out there. So what happens, like we talked about before, is the Medicare will pay for part of it, but then also the payer, which is the patient in that case, is also responsible for a part of it too. So essentially, reimbursement in a nutshell is private health insurers or public payers may reimburse the insured for expenses incurred from the illness or injury, or pay the provider directly for services rendered. Like Medicare has a certain visit limit, specifically though, with like that could be per state potentially, and then the importance of progress notes. This you'll tend to see a big thing that I learned, especially when I started in the outpatient setting, was that when my clinic director really explained like Medicare progress notes and Medicaid progress notes, obviously all of your progress notes are important, but these ones especially really take the time to really make sure every specific portion is filled out, and you get to make sure that you're proving that this is skilled care that is required and still needed, and it doesn't look like maintenance to the insurance. Otherwise, they could basically say, we're not going to allow more visits for this person. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to go to Medicaid. So Medicaid is a public health insurance program for people with limited income resources, regardless of age. So this one does not need to be age dependent. So just like Biddy was explaining in Massachusetts, what we have here is we have Mass Health. So we'll see that like pop up on our schedules. And so how Medicaid does their reimbursements is that CPT codes during each session that are used will be reimbursed for. So this is more what we call a fee for service type. So again, the insurance will cover part of it, payer patient will cover part of it as well, but this is more fee for service. Again, each state is going to have different requirements for visit limitations. So for Mass Health, like specifically, they give patients like 20 visits for PT, OT, speech, and that's what they've got for the year. And then we can obviously put in more for like more off, and we could say, you know, we would think this patient would benefit from more visits because of X, Y, and Z. And then again, just like we spoke about with Medicare, for Medicaid, making sure that those progress notes are very important and you're proving that skilled care is required. Any questions in the chat before we go on? Again, these are 2 big insurances that you're going to see a lot of. Give a couple seconds. All right, I think we're good.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the billing that I do. I work at an inpatient rehab unit. We document in a system called Epic. It's basically a lot of flow sheet type documentation, free text in cells that you turn into a note at the end. So we go based on time and number of units, regardless of the insurance that the patient has. So I use the Medicare Medicaid 8-minute rule for a Blue Cross Blue Shield, the same way that I would use it for Medicare Medicaid. So how I document their X, their act, neuromuscular re-ed, any of that is not necessarily the most important thing because they don't always audit. They more audit the time and the amount of units. And we have like a total minutes per 7 days requirement to stay on our unit to continue to get insurance off. So it's more important that your patients are hitting 900 minutes every 7 days that are divvied up into these units. So as you can see, there's specific minutes that go with a specific amount of units. And some places in the outpatient, like a Fox rehab, they do a lot of Medicare, Medicaid 8-minute rule billing type criteria too for their population. So the billing is a little bit easier inpatient hospital and inpatient rehabs in my experience because we use this, but we do still try to keep up with being able to correctly identify what goes into what category so that you can do like PRN at an outpatient neuroclinic or another location where that kind of stuff is more important. So this is super easy to find online. We do it all the time. We have it printed and posted all over the office, and it's easier for sure.
Hey, what are the other forms of insurances? Like we briefly mentioned, right, there are federal versus commercial. Federals are what Amanda spoke about, the Medicare and the Medicaid, and commercial insurances are all the other national insurances, wherein your Blue Cross Blue Shield comes in, Aetna comes in. You have different insurances with Howard Pilgrim. They have different insurances like TRICARE for military, Humana. There are different insurances, and those are commercial more, and federal are the two big main, Medicare and Medicaid. What is the difference? Like we mentioned, there is difference in documentation with federal versus commercial. With federal documentation, you have to be a little more crisp. You have to be a little more clear, explaining why you're using particular CPT codes, explaining why you're doing what you're doing. If you are in a clinic that sees multiple patients at once or twice, 2 patients an hour or 2 patients, 1 patient every half hour, say in an outpatient setting, you are supposed to make sure that you're trying to be careful about where you're billing and what you're billing with a Medicare patient. You might have a commercial patient with a Medicare patient. So all of that differs in terms of time that you're actually able to provide skillfully for a Medicare patient versus what you're billing for a commercial patient. I don't think commercial insurances have as much of a problem in you seeing multiple patients, but it's very important for Medicare that you're making sure that if you do see 2 patients, say at the same time, that you're billing effectively only for the skilled things that you're able to do with your Medicare patient. They have difference in policies. Like we said, some insurances right away give you X number of visits to be seen by physical therapy versus some insurances will give you a few visits to begin with, and then maybe they check the progress and have you do a progress note or a reevaluation, send them for more authorization, and then get back and probably do more. All of these problems I don't think exists in an inpatient or a skilled nursing facility because you're using mostly the federal insurances. This is more when you're in an outpatient setting. Cap of visits allowed. Medicare does in an outpatient setting have, and I can talk more about the outpatient. Christina can confirm with us for inpatient and skilled nursing, but they do have a cap of allowance. Now, it's a soft cap. There is a soft cap and a hard cap of how many visits, how much money is allocated to each account, to each person that avails the Medicare services. And then after that soft barrier of how many ever dollars it's allocated, you are supposed to make sure that you're still looking at skilled part in that patient's care. If not, you are likely to be audited, and they do audit. And yes, Medicare, if they audit your documentation, they don't file the skilled necessary, they can pretty much take all the money back that they paid for these patients' visits. So you gotta be careful, that could be a possibility. The 2 main other insurances that you see outside in an outpatient setting are workman's compensation and motor vehicle accidents. Workman's comp is also a very common insurance where people get injured at work and they are provided care from their workman's compensation insurances. And again, there's an adjuster that is involved from the patient's workplace that is involved in approving or denying care depending upon what they've reported, what the incident looks like. Same with motor vehicle accident, that if your patient has been in an accident and is under a motor vehicle accident, there are different guidelines to follow as to what to do, what not to do, what to report, how can you best effectively have communication and see patients with these two categories as well. Let's check with prognosis. Now, what is prognosis, right? The likely outcome that the patient or your patient's going to have in terms of recovery. When you're thinking about recovery, you want to make sure that you're giving your patient a likely outcome, something that they can deal with, right? Now, do you know for sure how long it's going to take for them to get better? I would not say a yes to that answer, because people are different, injuries are different, they vary from time to time. And during NPTE, we learned a specific guidelines to all injuries. Yes, you can hover around those guidelines and say what our muscle healing time looks like, what a particular injury time looks like, and you can generalize it, but you always are well off giving your true diagnosis, true prognosis, versus giving them like a very specific timeline, because that affects how they're going to participate in their care. If you think, if you tell them they're going to get better in 4 weeks, they're going to be timed on that, and that might affect their likelihood to get better. Giving a more generalized explaining, educating your patient about how and what their specific diagnosis looks like on evaluation, and what can be done and what can be achieved week by week, 2 weeks by 2 weeks. That's, I think, a better way to go about it. Because again, we said, injuries are different from person to person, and everybody heals differently. So it's a likely outcome of recovery, but you want to make sure that you're able to confidently try to explain them with patient education and with their ability to participate in their own care as to how fast or how likely are they to get better.
So with insurance coverage comes insurance limitations. And as you get exposure and more time in the field, you'll start developing your own sort of, I don't want to say irritations, but there are things about general insurance companies that can be really frustrating. So I just kind of listed a few from my perspective, some things that kind of get in the way of us in the inpatient rehab unit. They're usually, just like was said, there's a pre-authorized amount of time, usually, like the average length of stay at my unit is 2 weeks. Actually, Medicare, Medicaid just came out with their final rule for skilled nursing facilities and inpatient rehabilitation units for 2025, and then their plan going out to 2028. So they're going to increase the reimbursement rates, but they actually break down each diagnosis by the diagnosis, the age, and the motor involvement. And then on that same chart, you can see how many predetermined authorized days that diagnosis will have. So you have, let's say if you have a complete spinal cord injury, I think it's 20 or 21 days. So in that 20 or 21 days, you have to get this person all of their equipment. You have to get them as independent as possible. You have to get their family trained. So it's like, it can be very frustrating with the pre-authorization for length of stay from an inpatient perspective. And as you can see, some of the larger items like wheelchairs, Blue Cross Blue Shield, getting a wheelchair pre-auth takes 7 to 10 days, and weekend days don't count. Things like a hospital bed if they need to go home with something like that. So a lot of those decisions need to be made really early on, which from a physical therapy perspective can be super frustrating, because if you have like a 39-year-old patient that had a basal ganglia hemorrhagic stroke, he might be super dense on one side and has hemiparesis plegia, but you know that with time, you're going to slowly start seeing motor recovery, but you need to pre-authorize their wheelchair in their hospital bed. And you might be able to advocate for 3 weeks instead of 2, and they end up walking out with a cane in some sort of functional status. So like those things are constantly changing and can be a frustration, but it's just kind of how you have to play the game. Same with orthotics, depending on if you're Medicare, Medicaid, you can have orthotics delivered like 2 to 3 or 5 days before discharge. But if they're going to a skilled nursing facility, you can have someone come in and fit your patient for a custom orthotic, but they can't deliver them until they're about to go home from the skilled nursing facility. And some insurance companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield, I'm pretty sure they have to be delivered outpatient, like after they've discharged from the rehab unit. So those are just some of the things that kind of come up. The other thing that can be frustrating is they'll cover like one mobility item. So let's say you have someone who needs a platform rolling walker, they'll cover the walker, but the patient has to pay for the platform. And that's $50 off Amazon that they have to pay out of pocket. Then they have to pay for their shower chair if they need a shower chair and share in like a bedside commode. So it's like playing the game of where these insurance companies are willing to put money and what becomes an out-of-pocket expense for the patient and their family. And when you're serving an underserved community, that can be even more frustrating because they don't have a ton of funds and now they have this new diagnosis that's debilitating. And let's not even start on like the power chairs, custom wheelchairs, and home and vehicle modifications that are significantly more expensive and not covered at all. So it can be very detrimental and shocking to patients and their families to have something happen to them that will change the course of what their new normal is. So insurance is great. It has its ups, and there are definitely some things that need to be changed, which is why you guys need to be involved in advocacy and do what you can to advocate for your profession and for your patients. Because if you don't say anything to legislators, they are not going to change anything, and we're just going to keep talking into the wind and no one's going to hear us. So don't just treat patients, be involved as well when you get out there.
Alrighty. So after all of that, which was, we know a lot of information to throw at you guys. This is why we didn't want to overwhelm you, and we wanted to just give you like a little taste of this, just dip your toe in. So we want to ask now, how confident are you in understanding CPT codes and navigating US insurance options now after this webinar? David says very. Yeah, good. These are good. These are very good to be at right now. Yep. I got an A. Another B. A all the way. Great job, everyone. Okay, that brings us to the end of this webinar. We tried to collect all the information that we could together to put up with something that we can not overwhelm, but also give enough information on how to navigate through these topics. Do y'all have any questions? We're here to hang out for a little bit to answer your questions and make sure we're giving you the right information as much as possible. I'll stop the recording so that way we can stay here, but we just